and welcome to Steven University. This week we watched Secret Team, an episode in which, Steve is sort of misbehaving with Amethyst when they come across Pearl, who has taken a bubble from Garnet's bubble room thing that we've seen before, and is trying to is doing some sort of test. She's checking out how the shards will react to something somewhere. What she's exactly doing with it in the first place is unclear. And also, why she doesn't ask Garnet directly, can I borrow that for a second to have a look at? I don't know why she didn't just ask. But anyway, different story. In the end, the bubble gets popped, and the shards, which quite grotesquely turn into arms and legs and stuff, they sort of escape throughout the temple, and they're tasked with creating a secret team by Steven in order to recover them without Garnet finding out. It all goes a bit pear-shaped, because Steven, wanting another secret team, discovers that it's really hard to explain this episode without going into ridiculous amounts of detail. But basically, in the end, Garnet teaches them all a bit of a lesson about working together as a team, because it seems that the only way that Pearl and Amethyst were going to work together was to hide something from her. So she sort of makes a very deliberate point about the fact that they're all a team and they should all be on the same page. And I think it's a really good episode on the whole. Chris, immediately just going to do the good of your thoughts thing, because I've lost the will to live with this intro.
As of the audience, I went on a bit of a journey, because I was like, oh, they're gonna do the thing where they haven't hidden all the shards, and that's going to be the monster. Oh, they're not doing that. They're making each other the monster. Oh, cool. Oh, they've done that. They've made the shard the monster. Oh, they've not done that. It was Garnet all along, which I thought was a nice little journey that it took me on. So there was that. The other takeout is that I had one of my moments of, I like this show. Steven said something, and I was like, oh, Steven. And I was like, oh, God.
Do you remember what it was he said?
No, I can't remember what the moment was now, annoyingly. Because it got overtaken, Dan, by what is legitimately the most I have ever laughed at this show. As in the good way. Last joke of, between the four of us, we could have had a free pizza. That made me laugh so much.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny. I genuinely, out loud, and I'm on my own. There's no, you know what I mean? I think when you're on your own, you laugh more silently in a way, even if you find something really funny. But I literally was like, I really went for it, and laughed consistently for a good couple of minutes at that. I thought it was so funny.
Yeah. It's a really good line, because basically. So
great joke. I thought it was great. I thought it had a good message. I thought the montage, I love a montage because it really, you get to show off the animation. I thought the montage was good. I like that we are now not only, obviously the show literally went to space last week, and we had the Ocean Gems sort of saga, and so the show has sort of expanded its universe a bit. But I feel like they're not afraid now to, just plonk them in these weird gem rooms and stuff like that, and they can do that without having to explain what it is. So not everything's set. It's not like they go, something happens at the house, then we move into the gem scenario and explain the gem scenario as we go. It's just right, boom, this episode is set in their rooms, and they're all a bit weird, and we don't quite know for sure what's happening in them, but we know enough to get it, and I think that's interesting and engaging. I liked it.
Yeah, I really like this one as well. And I think what I like most about it is this idea that, in a weird way, it's kind of sad that to get Amethyst and Pearl on the same page, Steven had to, there had to be a crisis to bring them together in the secret team stuff, to hide from Garnet almost. And what I love as well is then Steven reveals it to Garnet in a way that they're going to teach them a lesson. And then Garnet teaches all of them a lesson, because she doesn't just trick Pearl and Amethyst. She tricks Steven too, because I don't think he was expecting the return of the shards that aren't really shards but are actually Garnet. So I think that this episode is a really very straightforward but simple. Even though the episode is actually quite complicated and quite hard to describe, as I discovered doing the intro this week. The actual, because it's so many twists and turns almost. It's hard to actually physically describe everything without just doing an 11-minute, then this happens, you know. I think the ultimate message is actually quite simple, which is that we're a team, we're together. We should not be hiding things from each other. We should not be bickering with each other. Steven should not need to be forming a team to keep shit secret from me for you guys to be on the same page. The fact he had to do that is kind of sad, and that is a very strangely simple message for an episode so complex. And then of course there's the other element of it, which is that there's a weird grotesqueness to it, because, and I thought this at the time. So if a full gem, can become a living being like a person or a monster of some description, depending on, because Pearl has described corrupted gems before, and they seem to be the ones that are turning into the monsters, right? We've established that. Mm-hmm. So a gem's information can get scrambled in a way that doesn't become a person anymore, it becomes a monster. And then the other gems that become... And then there's this gem shards. Now, if you were just saying those words to a person who doesn't watch this show, they would think of a gem smashed into bits. And what do they turn into? But bits of humanoid-shaped things. Arms, legs. That is grotesque. That is actually quite horrific. And I remember when I first watched this episode, being like, is this still a kid's show?
Yeah.
But then again, it's done so well, because it's sort of like... you have to sort of put that together if you want to get to that grotesque thought in the way I just did, that chain of events. You know, if a corrupted gem is this, if a not corrupted gem is this, if a shard of a gem then is this, that's gross. But otherwise, it's just, there's these gem shards and they've turned into weird things. Do you know what I mean? Like, you might not...
you could watch it. I think you could watch it as a child and not pick up that in the way you could watch The Simpsons and not pick up on some of the more sexual jokes. So, yeah, I think it works brilliantly. But it does feel like since... Mirror Gem, Ocean Gem, there's a shift, and I don't know if that's my perception / enjoyment, or if there is an actual shift in tone. But I think that's it's weird. Like, a lot of in the lead up to it, there was sort of a lot of talk from you and from what you'd said about like fan reaction and stuff to like, oh, Giant Woman is the episode that people get invested. But for me, Mirror Gem, Ocean Gem, I think is a turning point, more so than Giant Woman. And it's a turning point for similar reasons. I can see why Giant Woman would be a turning point for some people, because it's that glimpse of the wider mythology and you know, all that stuff. But I think I think the tone and episodes afterwards, there were some that then shifted sort of back a few weeks, whereas I know we're only 3 after Mirror Gem, Ocean Gem. But there's been no backward steps as far as I can see. There's been I think this was better than last week's, and we described last week's as sort of a default level. I think this one's slightly above that. But the cleverness of this is a children's show could have done the secret club, no, we should work together as a team plot so much more childishly, with so much less gravitas, and making the people think. Like, it's, you know, it's the J.K. Rowling thing of, you don't, just because you're talking to children doesn't mean you dumb it down. And this could have been so dumbed down, and I sort of feel like this plot, as episode 6, it would have been dumbed down, but it feels like there's been a change from Mirror Ocean, and it's not going to be dumbed down. And again, could be my perception.
No, I don't think. I think you're absolutely right, and it's interesting because I was trying to, when we discussed Mirror Gem, I tried to hint at that shift. Not Mirror Gem, sorry. Giant Woman.
Gem or
Giant Woman. Yeah. Because I recently had that one from the perspective I was recording this. Giant Woman went up about a week ago. So we only sort of just posted that, if that makes sense to the listeners. We've managed to get quite ahead of ourselves in order to try and keep up with this 2 a week thing. So when I re-listen to Giant Woman, I can hear myself trying to express that to you, but I'm not able to, and it's really frustrating because I can't directly say it. But I'm basically saying, because at the time, I can't remember what exactly I was responding to, but you basically said, oh, this feels like a big episode, this feels like an iconic episode, referring to Giant Woman. And I say, yeah, absolutely, this is a big hint of what the show gets to do going forward. I said, but there's an episode, and I literally say in like 10 episodes-ish time, there's a really sort of, there's a big shift. And I say something like in that, and I say roughly 10 episodes. I literally say the sentence, I won't give you the exact point. But that was episode 12. The point I was referring to, of course, was Mirror Gem Ocean Gem, which is about 13 episodes from that point. And it's funny because I couldn't directly say it, but I really wanted to say it. And you've literally just said the thing I was desperate to say at that time, but didn't want to give too much away about where we were going, and how much more deep the show could get. And I'm glad we're past that threshold now. And somebody else pointed this out. In fact, a lot of people did, because on the comments to the Giant Woman episode, a lot of people were writing things like, "Oh, I don't know if we agree with that about how important this episode is. This is an episode that gives you a hint and might make you stick around longer, but ultimately Mirror Gem Ocean Gem at the moment you're going to fall in love with the show." And I sort of agree with that mostly. It's just that I couldn't say that to you at the time, Chris, because because of the situation we're in. So
to keep going with the Harry Potter analogy, it feels like we're in a Prisoner of Azkaban era. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just really adult storytelling. Someone described it really well. I think again it might have been J.K. Rowling or someone else, but they basically said like you talk to a child in a way that makes them feel like you're talking to an adult or something like that. And I think that that's the most effective sort of stuff. And I think that this and Harry Potter does that. Harry Potter. So British. Does that. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting point for the show, and this episode is a really good example of how effective the show can be. A, without dumbing stuff down, but B, to the other side of that is to how effective it can be at a point where your audience aren't going, "What the fuck does this mean?" or aren't going, "Well, this is weird." Like, once you've got the audience used to stuff, because I think that's a big part of it as well. I think it would be unfair to be like, "Oh yeah, it's just completely because they're not dumbing stuff down anymore." No, the audience, you couldn't do this episode as episode 3 because the audience would be like, "Where are they? What are these things? What are they trying to bubbles? Huh? What?" You're more used to that now.
But would you not agree as well that it's crazy to think how much work you've got to put in as an audience member to get to this point? Because think back to those early episodes when they were just spending that time trying to entertain you while educating you about this stuff and bringing you into the world without it being too exposition heavy. How much like frustration you felt, especially in the first couple. I mean, you really have to cross a threshold to get to this point, and it's not an easy threshold to cross. I mean,
I struggle. I can see why someone in your position, where I struggle to see how, and I don't mean it unfairly, but like it obviously is a different form of watching TV and stuff. But how an adult that has like a child, already superior to some of the stuff they're watching, but also a child's not going, "Oh, should I watch Steven Universe or should I check out series 5 of Orange is the New Black?" Like, that's what I mean. So that's
I'm
the
not
dilemma.
trying to be
offensive.
So you're essentially saying you can't imagine how like I would prioritize this over any of the
in the early days. Justifying my use of the term child and adult in what I'm about to say, I can't imagine how an adult watches this show week to week at the beginning and gets into it. I completely understand an adult just powering through and it's playing the next episode. They're only 11 minutes long. Why not? Gets to Mirror Gem, Ocean Gem, and then is in.
Yeah.
But 20... Well, I suppose it wasn't 27, was it? It was, if you split that in half, it was like 14 weeks or whatever. If they were working on the assumption that you would watch 2 at a time in these early stages. How an adult sits through 14 weeks and is then in, that's 3 months to get to this point. Yeah. That I'm like, that's odd. I understand how you got into it. I think even you would have struggled week by week for 14 weeks on those early.
I'm not sure. I'll tell you why, because the reason I'm not sure I agree with that is because if you remember rightly from when we talked about this in the very early episodes of Steven University, which is a long time ago for us now. We started recording this in January. It is now June. But when we started on this weird little adventure, I talked about watching Adventure Time, having that reaction to the first few episodes of Adventure Time, giving it up completely, and then coming back to it later on and learning my lesson about judging these shows too soon. So when it got to Steven Universe, yes, you're right, I did have the luxury of having a big chunk to power through, including Mirror Gem Ocean Gem, 100%. But I think even then, if that wasn't the case, I still think I'd have ultimately gotten into this show because I had learnt my lesson, as it were, about prejudging these kid shows. Does that make sense?
It's funny, I can't remember who it was, but a friend turned around the other day and said, I don't understand why you're doing a podcast on Steven Universe when Adventure Time exists.
Because it's better.
Really funny. I didn't. I was just like, I don't know. You'd have to ask someone who's seen both shows.
Look, Steven Universe is a better show. It's a more consistent universe. There's better payoffs. There's more emotion. The stories aren't. The amount of cock teasing that goes on in Adventure Time it should be criminal. Honestly, the amount of what could this be? No, we'll pull the rug out from under that because we don't care. That show should be. And sometimes that show is amazing, and sometimes that show should be utterly ashamed of itself. So I can't, in good conscience, tell anyone to watch that over this, in my opinion. And that's coming from someone who enjoys Adventure Time and is up to date on Adventure Time and likes Adventure Time very much. But they do not compare. This world has been thought out far more in depth than Adventure Time's. And Adventure Time, look, if Adventure Time gets the choice between a gag and its continuity, it will choose the gag every time.
Yeah, that would frustrate me.
Yeah, and again, it's a show I enjoy, but and certainly it has moments that you could compare to Steven Universe. But to me, a person who says that sentence of why are you doing Steven Universe in a world where Adventure Time exists, that person isn't up to date on Steven Universe, in my opinion. Because if they were, they would know better.
Fair enough. So yeah, really, really enjoyable, strong episode. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because I didn't remember a great deal about this episode. This is one of the first. In fact, this is probably the first episode where I remembered that they make a team, and I remember there's a lot of I remember the scene where Steven meets Garnet in the booth and hands her the card and is and lets her in on the secret. I remember that part, but I didn't remember much else of this episode. To be honest with you, I couldn't remember why the secret team formed. I did remember the pizza cards being the cards though, and I remember that joke at the end because that's just, you're right, it's one of the better jokes the show's ever done. But I couldn't really remember the context of why they formed the team in the first place, what they were keeping from who. So all of that was it was rediscovering it a little bit. It's been a little while since I've seen this one, evidently, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So
that sums up, I think, quite nicely what the essence of what you're saying there. This episode, it is a joy to watch.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's joyous. It is just it's good fun, and it's good fun with a solid backing in character work and a solid backing in some of the more sort of interesting observations about this team and how they function, and how they dysfunction. Obviously Amethyst and Pearl could not be more opposites of each other. So yeah, I found that really interesting, and I found the way this episode sort of explored that without going too deep down that rabbit hole, which I thought was nice.
Yeah,
so
definitely
a lot to love.
Cool.
So that'll be everything for this week. I'm sure I say for this week, for this half a week. I'm sure we'll see you in a couple of days for another episode. So I've been Dan Newland.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And we'll see you in a couple of days' time to talk about Island Adventure.